Welcome to the ZNL Podcast, a podcast brought to you by ZN, the OG digital agency in Brussels.
And welcome to this episode of ZNL, the podcast. I'm very excited today to have a special guest who is two people at once. Welcome to Quentin Deschandelier and also MEP Assistant. So I guess you are famous for your avatar, MEP Assistant. So welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Happy to be there, and thank you again for the invitation. Looking forward to discussion.
So yeah, very happy to have you. You've been around for over 10 years, over a decade, with a lot of experience in Brussels, and you have your own professional life as a legal advisor for the Federation of the European Publishers. But at the same time, you've developed, when you started your career as an MEP assistant, an online persona called MEP Assistant. And so you've stuck with that, which I find very interesting. And this is actually a profile that built quite a lot of followers on X, as well as on Twitch, and also on Instagram. You're doing communication across different channels. So can you tell me a little bit about what got you started, and how has it grown today?
So it started a bit as a private joke. To be honest, I started that in 2013 when I started in the European Parliament as an intern. I was an intern, like many people in the bubble. And as a private joke, I said, okay, I'm gonna create a Tumblr. Back then, that was the trend, to tell about the daily life in the European Parliament in a funny way. And as I started doing it, it turned out that people were actually discovering and watching it and liking it in the Parliament and beyond. So I kept doing it. I switched platform. I went on X, Instagram, etc. And as time went by, it became what is MEP Assistant today, which is one of the biggest EU influencer, let's say, around on a multitude platform, mixing humor, information, etc. But it all started from a joke. And to be honest, if you had told me 12 years ago almost that starting a Tumblr would land me where I am now, probably I would have not believed you. But it's a pretty good story so far, and I still want to continue it for a while. But yeah.
Yeah, and you've been exploring different channels, and we're going to come back to that. Now, you've also been recognized. You have you got the third place for the Jean Monnet Prize for European Integration. That sounds pretty serious for what started as a joke. So, what was that?
So that particular prize it was in 2021. It was for my Twitch channel. I just launched it as to explore more the information aspect, like doing political interviews with MEPs, or even commissioner, professionals, etc. Doing news reviews. So really reach out outside the bubble to explain from the perspective of a EU professional, because I define myself first and foremost as a EU professional, and my job is. I'm a lobbyist. I used to be an MEP assistant, hence the name. But yeah, I see that my contribution is bringing the perspective of a professional to outside the bubble to make it clear, okay, what is actually going on in Brussels, why it's important, how it concerns people, and recreate a connection between the bubble and outside. And back then, it was seen as something that was fairly innovative, and to an extent, unfortunately, it still is. Twitch has not become a main, let's say, way of communicating in the bubble. I still think there's a big potential, and that's part of the reason why I still get recognition for what I'm doing. But yeah, it's still novel. There's still more work to be done on that potential. Yeah.
Yeah, and you've been on the EU influencer ranking several times, because from our analysis, you were reaching quite a few people in the bubble with kind of shaping the conversation. So what's the mission? I mean, what's the purpose of doing that now? The origin story, okay, you're an intern, you're doing this, and then it starts growing. You've kept the name, obviously. So, and I also, when I compared some of the things that you're posting, well, you're not posting a lot on your personal channel compared to that. So you're clearly enjoying this. So what's the mission? What are you trying to achieve with MEP Assistant?
I mean, I still still want to use sense of humor. I have a sense of humor. I like to make jokes, so I want to keep doing that. And I see what is MEP Assistant. So I kept the name because even after I left the parliament, that was a bit of a debate I had when I left on whether to keep the name or not. In the end, I kept it because it's the brand. Whether I like it or not, that's how people identify me. So I kept the name. And I see myself here again as this idea of the bridge. I'm trying to create bridges and both making giving information to the outside and be also a bit of a reality check to the EU to basically say, okay, don't take yourself too seriously because, well, sometimes you are worthy of criticism. And so my content is a mix of fun stuff about the daily life in the bubble. It's about also some criticism about how the bubble functions, how politics function, etc. Sometimes I do provide political analysis on what's going on, and also the more informational part for the outside to translate to, let's say, to a general audience that is more disconnected from traditional media, what's going on in the EU. So it's a mixed bag of everything to try to talk at the same time to the bubble and also outside the bubble.
And this is entirely private. So basically, yes, what you say as MEP Assistant is your views outside of work. How do you separate your professional life with your secret life as the MEP Assistant? And you told me that you started anonymously. So why did you start anonymously? When did you stop doing that? And how do you keep the two spheres of activities separate?
So I started anonymously MEP Assistant for a very simple reason. So I was working in the European Parliament and I didn't want to be fired. It's a very pragmatic thing because back then, 10 years ago, the idea of having someone making jokes about the daily life of MEPs was not something that was necessarily going to be potentially explosive, professionally speaking. So I stayed anonymous. Probably if I was starting now MEP Assistant, it would be maybe less of a problem because culture, so the culture will be a bit change inside the bubble. But back then, I saw it as necessary to stay anonymous to protect my career, and also what was my professional credibility, which was, of course, I was just going out of university. Today, if I was to go back to the parliament, I would not care about keeping my name out there because I've reached a size and a credibility that in a way protects me. I stopped being anonymous a bit after I started in 2021, a bit after I started the Twitch. Actually, when I received the Jean Monnet Prize, because I considered that it was a moment, okay, I got sufficient recognition that it would probably not blow in my face to stop being anonymous, and it was necessary for Twitch because at the beginning I was doing political interviews and people could not see my face, so it was always a bit awkward with people interviewing people and people can't see you. So I said, okay, also for the comfort of the people I'm interviewing, it's better if I am able to show my face. I was very nervous at the beginning, but in the end it worked perfectly fine and nobody minded at all. Then on the professional aspect, indeed, I do that on the side of my job. It's not something that I do while at the office. Basically, to keep the separation, I try to organize things as much as possible so it doesn't conflict. So I will schedule posts, etc. So I don't have to say, stop at a meeting, I have to post a tweet to post a joke. Of course, I can't do that. And also, I keep out of, let's say, MEP Assistant content things that could create conflict of interest, for instance. And typically, topics on which I work professionally, I will avoid covering them as MEP Assistant, or if I'm in an interview, I'm meeting an MEP who discuss about a topic I'm working on professionally, I will avoid, I will not give an opinion, my professional opinion on the topic. I will give the general context, but I will not cross the line or create a situation that could lead to a conflict of interest. So far, that's how I've been doing things. It's working fine. Hopefully, we'll keep going like this.
And basically, you're having these interviews with people, talking to them out of your own curiosity. I mean, you're just interested in understanding certain things? What drives you in those moments? What is the prime motivation there?
For the interviews themselves, so interviews, I will do MEPs, commissioners, EU experts, journalists, sometimes lobbyists, etc., etc. The idea for me is a mix of curiosity, because sometimes there are topics that are important that I don't necessarily fully understand myself. So having an expert coming over to talk about it is interesting, but also shedding a light on topics that are, let's say, shaping the EU activities, EU priorities that have an important aspect for an impact on citizens. So also putting that in front of people and giving them the opportunity to ask questions. And more generally speaking, again, the idea of putting faces on the EU, because especially when I'm talking about Twitch, my audience is completely outside the bubble. Like, it's 95% of the people are not in Brussels. They're not EU professionals. They're nothing to do with the EU. They are interested in politics and EU politics. They're watching me, so I'm trying to interest them, but they have nothing to do with the daily life of the bubble. And so I'm trying to recreate a link and put faces to her, because people know, usually what I say is that people know that Brussels is out there, but it's a bit like fog. It's out there, but you can't see it properly. And so my goal is to dismiss a bit the fog and put faces so that people can realize that behind the general idea of Brussels and EU politics, there are faces, there are people who have passions, motivation, reasons to do things, whether you agree with them or not, etc., and to bring these things forward so that people understand why EU politics is like this and what shapes EU politics.
Now, we have a new generation, or at least a new series of individual politicians who are very effective users of social media, and in particular the MEP Phidias, who is I guess getting a lot of traction from a new audience, a new demographic. He's doing it on his channels, which is Instagram, YouTube, X. So of course he's part of a movement which is the shift towards these influencers or YouTubers who enter into politics, or people who use these channels. So what are your thoughts on this individual? I mean, there are only a few people who are really doing that in the European Parliament. So do you think this is an anomaly, or do you think this is the beginning of a trend?
A bit of both, actually, because Phidias is someone that I find, putting aside his politics, someone that I find very interesting as a case, because he is a professional content creator that was elected as MEP, and he's bringing this expertise to the European Parliament, and so that creates a situation where he is able to leverage his very specific expertise and the fact that he has an audience that is normally completely disconnected from EU politics, and he brings it to the bubble. And so in his content, he does things that are a mix of fairly educational videos about the daily life of being an MEP. It's something that I think is very positive, and that other MEPs should take note on how to engage people and talk about your daily life as an MEP let's say in a way that can be interesting for the outside world, and at the same time also doing things that are arguably relatively populist in the way he's doing things, like, for instance, when he's polling, okay, should I vote for or against von der Leyen as Commission President, by a poll on Twitter, without explaining why you should potentially vote for her, why you should potentially vote against her. That's a very populist take. That's a trend. I think it's not necessarily a big thing, a good thing, but well, that's how it is. But that being said, again, I think he brings something interesting at the table. And I saw also, since he's very big on direct democracy, he announced that he was creating even an app. He was going to develop an app to introduce direct democracy to what he's doing, so his votes, what he should do or not do. So it'll be interesting to see what this app looks like, and how in practice that will affect what he does, and if he will find himself put in difficult situations because of that or not.
Yeah, I think he has it's difficult to understand fully his political views, because I think he's himself hasn't necessarily been reflected on that before he got elected. But one thing he is doing, and which I think is very interesting, is to bring awareness about the parliament to a much broader audience than potentially the institutions are doing. And if you watch his videos, he's basically just, there's a lot of explainers, like, okay, I'm standing here, this is what happens, and I'm going to do that, and he does it quite well. And so I think that's quite fascinating. I have seen this from other people on Instagram, like Sabine Atkas, who's doing things around climate and around, again, working for the EU. We have other Instagrammers who are also creating content to try to explain small things about the EU. And of course, I feel that you are also in that space, which is, communicating in a different language, in your case with humor and with different aspects, things. My question is it, I mean, it's interesting that none of this is part of the institutions. They are not directly funding any of this, and actually everybody, well, in all cases except I guess for Phidias, are doing this outside of their day job. So do you think this is something that the institutions should try to be more actively engaged with, or it would never work anyway and people will start doing this naturally but from outside the institutions?
From an institution point of view, it's difficult to do things that influencer do because they have the constraint of having to be institutions. That being said, they can have a role in supporting that, in helping create an environment. And I know that the commissions, the institution now have sort of influencer programs. So they have relations with a number of influencers. They're trying to get influencers, including people who do not talk about politics normally, to talk about the etc. So they are trying to engage with this environment of influencers. I still think there are more things that should be done. For instance, like even with people who are dedicated to EU politics, like myself, I don't have that many interactions with the institution, which is something that I regret personally. But so there are things to be done. But yeah, it's always a bit the difficulty, because even if you have the people in the social media department of the Commission and the Parliament who may be very keen on doing things and maybe wanting to do something very bold, ultimately they answer to people above them, or and then to politicians who are thinking about the reputational damage, etc., etc. Like, to give you a very concrete example, outside influence, so you may know the TV show Parlement, French TV show that is taking place inside the Parliament. So now they done 4 seasons. Huge success. During the first season, they did not shoot in the Parliament. They were not allowed to shoot in the Parliament. And why? Because the Parliament did not give them the authorization, because they were panicked at the idea that it would backfire against them. And when they saw the first season it was a huge success, they backed and said, "Oh, it's great. You can have the Strasbourg Parliament during summer whenever you want." So there's always this fear of reputational damage, which is to an extent a legitimate fear. But I think it's sometimes limiting a bit too much the potential in terms of influence, and also they should work more on the influencer program to help content creators doing content about the EU.
Yeah, and there's a big divide still. The vast majority of people across Europe who don't really, are not really aware of what these institutions are, sometimes not knowing that they exist, what they do, and how they connect to their own lives. So I think communication there is still lacking, and it needs to be done in a way that relates to people on a local level. Now, when you go to MEPs like Phidias, one of the things he was saying in an interview was that, first of all, when he went into the election, he was polling at ridiculously low levels. Nobody knew that he would break through. Then he won cumulatively more votes than all his opponents. And he said, this is because I'm using the tools that matter today, and they don't understand this. Now, there's been a discussion in the US that to some degree, Donald Trump was using new tools, connecting to podcasters, the famous Joe Rogan podcast and endorsement just before the election, showing a kind of real structural shift to this new media. Do you think Phidias is right in saying that this is why he won, because he was playing with the tools that matter today, and other people are still trying to focus really on the mainstream or legacy media? And is that the case in Europe as well? Because I think we can see that there has been this shift in the US, not quite so much in Europe. What do you think is happening here?
I'm not necessarily convinced it's a question of tools. In the sense, it's not because Trump went on a youth podcast that suddenly he won, or that big, or because Phidias was a YouTuber that he won. There's a bit of that, and of course, using the new tools that connect with people as a role. But ultimately, it was more about the demographics behind these tools, and also a populistic take on that. Like Trump going to use podcasts on Joe Rogan, etc. It had a big impact, not because of the tool itself, because it was a podcast, but because the demographic he wanted to reach was young male adults that were increasingly radicalized or having very right-wing position, and so reaching out to this demographic and acquiring it politically, and in a way having Joe Rogan endorse him, giving away his audience to that. And there it's more a question of the weight also of influencers. When you have influencers that are endorsing politicians, it has a big impact, because you have to understand that for many people who are disconnected from traditional media, the influencers can be their Bible. Having an influencer telling them, this is what I believe, they will believe that, no questions asked. I've seen that, I've seen people in real life, discussing, telling to influencers, I will not. I've believed. We were talking about politics, something in politics, an analysis in politics, and the people were saying, if I had seen someone else had told me that, I would not have believed it. But because you are telling me that, okay, I'm following you and I'm agreeing with you, and so I will follow that analysis. So it's more about the demographic that are behind and the endorsements and the weight of influencers themselves. Phidias is not the tools that made his election. It's the fact that he has a huge community behind him, and that he was able to use to his advantage the whole populist backlash against established political parties, etc., that fed his campaign and that led people to vote for him. So I don't think it's necessarily the tool. It's the influencers, it's the context of populism that is behind that, that is giving a big boost to this sort of profiles.
Yeah, but if he didn't have the tools, I mean, if Phidias didn't have access to YouTube, or if these tools, he wouldn't have been able to have this outreach. So I think there's a combination. I mean, I think you're right.
No, I agree. I'm not. What I'm saying is that it's not just the mere fact of using YouTube that automatically makes you successful.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Now, in terms of the channels that you're currently using right now, where do you spend most of your time? And in our EU influencer event, there was a big discussion about whether people should leave X because it's become a Trump platform, basically, entirely political. So you're still active on X. You're also active on Twitch. I don't know if you're active on Blue Sky, but I've seen obviously that you're also on Instagram. So where are you spending time, and how do you feel about the kind of the politicization of the channels?
So I'm present on pretty much like all the main social media, so X, Instagram, Blue Sky, Discord, Twitch. The only one I'm not on, and that's a bit my regret, is TikTok, because I don't have the video editing skills. That's my big regret. But I'm mostly active on X, Twitch, and I'm trying to increase my presence on Blue Sky. Being more proactive on Blue Sky. I will post all my content, but being a bit more like all the side content, the comments, etc. I'm trying to bring it more to Blue Sky. On the debates on X, on whether or not to use it post Trump election, etc. So far, I've still considered that X is my main platform. I will remain on it for the time being, even if I acknowledge that there is very clearly big issues on X. I've seen it like in the quality of my feed has gone to shit. let's say it like it is, and it's becoming extremely hard to find decent content on X. But I'm staying there because for the time being, the zero bubble is still present there. So the day you see a bit of a shift towards blue sky, the question is whether this is a trend that will stay like it is, or if it's going to stop within the next couple of months. So we'll see that whether it confirms or not. But for now, I'm staying on X. I'm staying on X because that's where people of the bubble are. That's where a lot of people still follow me. And the difficulty also in this is, and the big difficulty in switching from one social media to the other, is the question of you have to rebuild an audience. That's the big issue.
Yeah.
Because you have to restart from scratch. The only platform that's because they belong to the same group that add a solution to this is Threads, because you could import from Instagram all your followers. So I think that's a very good feature, but that's only possible because it's Meta who owns both platforms. But I think if there was one day a way to transfer all your followers from one platform to the next in an interoperable way, I would think that then there would be a significant shift away from X. But there, for the time being, I think there's a network effect. People stay on X in the bubble because people are on X in the bubble. It's like everyone still has a Facebook account. Many of us don't actually use on the daily our Facebook account. We don't delete it because everyone else is there. So I think there's a bit of that also in X. And you have a bit of a similar debate about TikTok on whether or not to be there, etc. But also it relates to the demographics of the users.
Yeah, you mentioned the transfer of followers. It's a very, obviously, for the more nerdy audience, the interoperability question has been quite a big discussion topic, because first Mastodon, then Threads and Blue Sky all said that they would offer some form of an open protocol or a form of interoperability. It doesn't quite work fully in any of the platforms. I think in theory it does, but in practice it's getting complicated. But what I'm seeing now is that Blue Sky, which has had a recent surge post-election, there's a lot of API work happening, and people talking about the possibility of gaining some better control over the content. I don't know if that's going to come through or not, but I think at least that they're focused on building that as a possible new way of creating your content and linking it up to blog platforms, to newsletters, and potentially across different platforms. Now, you mentioned one channel, TikTok, and I started the question about politicization of these platforms. So as we said, X has become political, but TikTok has always been given its ownership directly through the Chinese government. You also mentioned something about the political ranking that was sponsored by TikTok. Now, this is another space, but what is it that you find disturbing about that sponsorship?
So for those who don't know, Politico 28 is like the big EU ranking that happens every year, that is organized by Politico. They make a big thing around it, and then they have some sponsoring. So in principle, there's always a debate about sponsoring in general. I tend to say that's part of the current life of a news organization. They need to find themselves, so they use sponsoring. That's a separate question. But then you have the question of TikTok, and indeed, I have a bit of an issue. I had a bit of an issue with TikTok sponsoring that specific event, because TikTok is currently involved under heavy scrutiny by the EU institutions for its role in the electoral issues in Georgia, in Romania, etc., etc. It is actually banned on official devices in the Commission, in the Parliament, in the Council. So if you have a Parliament phone, you can't install TikTok. You're not allowed to have TikTok because of cybersecurity issues, etc., etc. So there is a bit of I think it's a poor political choice from Politico to let their big event on EU ranking, power ranking, being sponsored by TikTok, because in a way they're allowing TikTok to whitewash its image and also get get in a way exclusive access because they had part of the event that was sponsored to TikTok. So you have to imagine that TikTok people were there and being able to say, "Oh, look, that is organized thanks to us." So I think there, Politico made maybe a poor political choice in allowing that sponsoring that allows to whitewash, given the context. To be fair to Politico, to be fair to them, they were criticized. I sent a tweet, so you take that as a light criticism. But also on stage, I understand they were criticized by Kaya Kalas, who mentioned that indeed it was a bit odd to have TikTok sponsoring the event, and they did acknowledge that in the next Politico on the next day when they were telling what happened. They did acknowledge that they were criticized on the sponsoring and saying, well, we remain, nonetheless, we are independent editorially, etc. But they did acknowledge that they were criticism, which has to be recognized. But ultimately, I think there is a problem because they allow TikTok to whitewash its image in a context where they're under heavy scrutiny by an institution for a big event, arguably in the bubble.
Yeah, no, I think it's, it's the life of the lobbyists, I guess, in Brussels to try to find visibility in front of the right audience, which is always political, but in this case, it's I guess, particularly challenging. Now, as we enter into 2025, what are the big things that you are excited about or scared about in 2025? We're going to have a pretty different world. We have a Trump administration, new commission, new parliament, new everything. What are you looking forward to, and what are you concerned about?
I'm most maybe not concerned, but interested to see how things will play out. Because as you say, like we are in a new Trump world. Trump is coming in January, and as is Trump standard, nobody knows what he's going to do. He says a lot of things, but you never know whether he's going to actually do it or do the opposite. So he's going to be interesting to see what he actually does, the impact on the EU, and also how the EU reacts to it and communicates in the face of that. And that's going to be extremely interesting. We also see in the EU, generally speaking, like a rise of a return of populism of the far right, etc., etc. And how does the EU and also national governments respond to that context? So that's something that I'm interesting to see on the substance, and also in terms of communication strategies, how they're going to face that, and within the parliament, because of course, given my history, I keep a close tab on the parliament. All the discussions about the new Venezuela majority and everything, see how it will impact the daily working life of the parliament, if the tradition of compromises inside the bubble will be impacted severely about this, or whether a new normal will be found where everyone can still function, and how it impacts the general over politicization of EU discussions and the communication around it. That's the things I'm looking forward to in 2025 to see how it will play out, because that will then set the trend for the rest of the mandates.
So when young people are coming into Brussels for the first time in 2025, perhaps as communicators or lobbyists, what is your advice to them? What do they have to look out for, and what are the skills that you tell them that they most need?
So for people who just arrive in the bubble, usually what I recommend to them, if they want to make a name for themselves and these sort of things, is find your niche. Like, everyone is specialized in the bubble. You need to find your specialty, the topic on which you will get recognition. You will have talent. You will have particular skills, and so find that niche. Potentially a niche that is not too overcrowded to allow you to exist, but find that niche and try to thrive in it. Both in terms of communication, in terms of expertise, etc. But priority, you can't be everywhere, so find your niche. Second thing that I usually recommend, more on the side of communication, is communicate, of course, be consistent in your communication, but don't force it. Like, don't be natural. Like in modern communication, people can see very easily when you overdo it, or if you do something that is not natural, that you're forcing yourself. And on the contrary, we see the communicators that tend to work are people who seem to be enjoying what they do and seem natural at it. So find a style that you are comfortable with, and stick to it. Stick to it. Don't try to follow trends if these trends are not the kind of things that you're comfortable in doing, because it will show that you're not comfortable doing that, and it will impact the credibility that you have there. So be consistent, be natural, never force it. And final advice that I give usually is, it's always okay in the bubble to ruffle some feathers, to challenge a bit the way things are working. So you can ruffle some feathers, but at the same time, be careful not to cross a line or appear to be unfair. Like if I take my example, I have no problem criticizing the EU in the way it functions, EU politics on the daily, but I will never go into personal attacks, or I will never focus only on one party. Like, I criticize everyone. If someone does something wrong, you will get a criticism, you will get a meme from my part. On the same side, if you do something good, I will commend that. So you have to seem fair in the way you do things, and that way that builds your credibility, because you're seen as someone who is serious about what they do and who is not trying to in a way poeticize the way you're doing communication, which I think is an important thing to do in Brussels, to be able to speak to most people.
Excellent. No, I think it's very, very good advice. Finding your niche, building your story, and doing that in a natural and authentic way. But I also think it's a great investment in your reputation, your career, and creating future opportunities for you as people start recognizing who you are and what you're interested in. So now it's time for our recommendation.
Recommendations of the week.
What are your recommendations, or what is your recommendation for our listeners?
So being French, I apologize. I will recommend you French content. Sorry for the non-French people, even if I think there are translations available. So I will recommend to you one TV show and one book. One TV show I already mentioned, Parlement. So a French TV show that is taking place inside the European Parliament, telling the story of at the start an MEP assistant. It's a very funny show. And why do I recommend it? Because it's something about the bubble. It's not every day that we have a cultural content about what's happening here, so it's always good. But at the same time, I think it's very interesting in the storytelling and how it brings information about the EU, because I've seen the impact of that show. Usually when I do interviews, I will prepare them. I will ask people, okay, suggest me questions, etc. And a question that now, ever since Parlement has been released, question I get every single time when I interview a French MEP, I will get someone asking, is it like in Parlement? And so the Parlement, even if it's a comedy, even if it doesn't reflect exactly the life of the European Parliament and the bubble, etc., does an excellent job at explaining complicated EU concepts, EU practices to an audience that has no knowledge whatsoever about the EU. So I thought that it is a very challenging task. I'm well placed to know that, and they did it very well. So definitely something to watch, and potentially take inspiration on how to explain things. Like to this day, in Parliament, there's the best explanation I've ever seen on what is a compromise. Like that's a very daily thing. You have very good examples inside Parliament. The second thing I will recommend you is a book by Jean Quatremer, so a French journalist, correspondent of Libération, well known here in Brussels. The book is called Les Salauds de l'Europe, so Europe's Bastards, if I translate it. It's a book that was published in 2017, so it's not recent, but it's very interesting because in this book, Quatremer takes all the anti-EU trope, Eurosceptic tropes. He starts from them. He builds on them. He starts every chapter with one specific trope, and he argues in favor of it. So you read the chapter, you have the impression that actually he agrees with the criticism about the EU, and then he demolishes it. He shows all the disinformation behind it, why the argumentation doesn't hold up, and I think it's very interesting as a tool for debunking the EU, the criticism against the EU, etc., and even the approach on fighting disinformation. So it's a book I always recommend as far as I'm concerned.
Excellent. So it sounds fascinating. Where can we watch Parlement? Is it streaming anywhere?
So in France, I know it's France Télévisions. In Belgium, I think it's BETV these days that has the right, but it's available in France, Belgium, Germany. I think Italy as well. So you can find a channel to watch it.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to make a kind of tech recommendation, just to some of the things that are coming out in recent times. One of them is actually that Google Gemini, the AI from Google, has just released deep research, and this is a very interesting kind of version. It's you have to be a paid subscriber, but it kind of does research based on a prompt. It goes through websites, it summarizes the content of these websites, it creates a report. It takes a few minutes to actually generate the output, so it's not a ChatGPT direct query. It's really like it will go in depth, and it produces a report. I've been playing with it, and it's surprisingly good. It does something that I haven't seen really from other AI tools. The other thing I wanted to mention is for those who've been following another actually Google tool, which is Notebook LM, where you can basically put together information in a closed data set, and then with that information you can put a report, an article, whatever. It creates a podcast, and so the podcast is really impressive. It's two people chatting, very, very kind of tech wizardry. But they just added a new feature which totally blew me away, which is you can actually join the conversation. So you can press a button and you can ask a question, and the two speakers will start changing and respond to you. So it's just like, oh my God. I think, we're going to see more and more of these features of how you can make that podcast personalized. So very exciting stuff. Still some incredible breakthroughs happening on the tech front almost every day. We've had all the announcements from OpenAI with Sora and all that, but it just continues, and we're going to see a lot more of that as we move into 2025. So that is all we have time for. Thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your insights. We will see you on Twitch, on X, on Instagram, on Blue Sky, on all the other channels that you're active on. Thank you very much for your contribution to the European conversation, and see you online. Have a fantastic 2025. Bye.
Thank you, and thanks for the invitation. Bye.
Thank you so much for watching this episode of the ZNL podcast. Did you like it? If so, please share it on your social media, subscribe, and give us a comment. We will see you again on the next episode. Until then, remember, stay always one step ahead.